Middle Path Radio, your number one online Islamic talk station.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome to Straight Talk on Middle Path Radio. I'm Quddus Ali. I hope you are well. Once again, we see in the media Islam is under attack. A three-piece swimming costume has become the subject of much controversy. I'm not sure it's the swimming costume, the three-piece clothing is neither here or there. I believe there is a more sinister agenda behind all this. France's Women's Rights Minister, Laurence Rossignol, was ostensibly expressing her anger. She argues that the costume is an unacceptable manifestation of a faith that allegedly locks up bodies. This is a perfect excuse for the champions of liberal values to really show their true colors. The fact is that they cannot tolerate anything other than their own values. What do you think? Call us or text in with your question and comment on 07477 080248. I would like to hear from you, especially if you are a Muslim woman wearing the burkini and hijab. How do you feel about going out wearing your Islamic attire? Do you feel nervous and apprehensive about what people might say or do to you? I would like to hear from you, inshallah. So please call in with your question and comment. To enlighten us on this issue of bikini versus burkini, who is more liberated, I have a special guest online, Sister Ibtihal Bsis. Assalamu alaikum, sister.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah khair for coming on to the show, inshallah.
Oh, wa yakum, brother. It's always a pleasure, wallahi.
MashaAllah. So, for the benefit of the listeners, I will just introduce you, my sister to you. Ibtihal Bsis is a barrister by profession and has been for more than 20 years. She heads her own chambers named Armana's Chambers. Ibtihal has extensive experience in advising the Muslim community on the counter-terror laws and more recently the CTS Act and the Prevent policy. She has advised private independent schools, mosques and Islamic institutions. She has trained other lawyers in the CTS Act and has collaborated with CAGE in the delivery of workshops. She has been invited to deliver these workshops all over London, in Norwich, in Bristol, Nottingham and Sheffield, Southampton and Cardiff. She has written a number of articles, including one entitled 10 Ways the CTS Workshop Affects Muslims, amongst other articles, and has produced a short film about Prevent. She has appeared on Ummah Iqra channels to discuss the new law. She is a mother of 4 children, Libyan by origin. She was a former presenter on the Muslima Dilemma show on Islam channel and has been a guest on BBC Radio 4 and Press TV amongst other media outlets. She is a Tajweez teacher and studied the Quran under the scholars in Aleppo, Syria. So alhamdulillah, we're very privileged to have our sister online with us today, inshallah. Sister Ibtihal.
Yes.
Sister, obviously you are aware of what is going on in the media, and so I will start by asking you, in terms of what is if you can explain to our listeners exactly what has happened recently, inshallah, for the benefit of our listeners, inshallah.
Of course. What has happened recently, and the furore is about a woman in Cannes, in France, who was stopped by armed police, I believe 3 police officers. We've all seen the pictures. And ordered to undress, remove her, well, it wasn't actually a burkini. It was just clothing that covered her arms.
Sure.
And they said to her that they thought it an affront to their values, and they obviously thought it was some kind of terror threat, which is, well, it would be laughable if it wasn't so serious. So she was ordered to undress under gunpoint, effectively. Now, that's very serious. I mean, those sort of acts, if an ordinary person had done that to another woman, that would be considered a quite serious assault, and it's imprisonable. But because the state did it, and it was police officers that did it, it was considered perfectly okay by some. Although there has been a lot of people that objected. I understand there was a protest outside the French embassy today. in which people quite imaginatively and creatively took sand with them, Muslims and non-Muslims, and non-Muslims stood in solidarity with Muslims and said that women should be entitled to wear the burkini if they so wish. Apparently 3 French towns have done this who have the benefit of having a sea, and it's going through the courts as we speak. But I really can't fathom a more serious offence created by the state within their own borders to make a woman undress at gunpoint.
But this is not the first time, is it? I mean, the French does have a history of this, obviously not as drastic as this, but in terms of in the last few years, even under Sarkozy, you've had the introduction of the ban on the burka. So
even before that, Jacques Chirac,
well.
We had the ban of the hijab in public, in government places, such as the mayoral offices. Every town has something called a mairie, where you go in to registered births and deaths and marriages and all the rest. I've actually attended one. I lived in France for 3 years, and I lived there during the hijab ban.
How was it for you then? If you can explain to our listeners, because we can hear from the horse's mouth, alhamdulillah, as it were, because you've lived there. How was it for you there when you were living there?
It was at a time when Britain hadn't been hit by things like the counter-terror laws that we live under now. I remember watching a program in 2002 when I was living out there, saying the title entitled, is the hijab conducive or with French values or for a French way of life? And I was shocked. And I said to my husband that this would never happen in Britain. I've never known this. But of course, it's now been exported here. Sorry, go ahead.
No, as a lawyer, as you know, France is a signatory to the European Convention on Human Rights. I mean, it's really.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm asking this question, but I know is really no point, to be honest, because if freedom of expression, what happened to freedom of expression, freedom of one's right to clothing? This is just. I mean, what happened to all of that? What happened to the equality, the liberty that underpins the French Republic? I mean, how do you explain that?
I think this has nothing to do with equality or freedom, they've just exposed themselves, and they continue to expose themselves, for want of a better word. Their freedom are a farce. It's just lip service to a state that makes women take off their clothes, actually tries to monitor 4-year-old children as to what they're thinking. I mean, we have Prevent now, but Prevent was working in 2002 quite openly in French schools. I remember there was a little girl, I was just speaking to her today, but she's 16, she's still living in France, and she wears the hijab, and she goes to the only Islamic school in Paris. And she said that when she remembers quite clearly, I remember when she was 4, that a teacher was asking her what she thought about the Quran. And she came home, and I remember she was a very bright little girl, and she said to me, "Auntie, they want to get into our heads." And I knew exactly what she was talking about. They want to survey. It's a kind of surveillance as to what the person is thinking. Now, we all understand this now because we have the Prevent strategy.
Sure.
But this was going on in 2002. So effectively what's happened is every European state, including Britain, has looked at France and thought, we will have more of that. And they've exported these sort of quite draconian policies and laws and even discussions that we're having now about whether, not we as a Muslim community, but various right-wing organizations and various irresponsible politicians, of which there are many, unfortunately, and even mainstream media, which are very irresponsible, very dangerous, and have helped to create this kind of narrative that's created what we now term as Islamophobia. These kind of attributing attire, our Islamic attire, and picking on vulnerable women who have no power and no say, picking on them and saying that this is a very clear sign of terrorism, because they're aligning the hijab with terror, with ISIS, with what's Al-Qaeda, with whatever, the organization that they're attacking at the time. So, and that is the most worrying aspect of this, because they used to say that we are stopping the burqa, and incidentally, very few people wore the burqa in France. I think about 300 women wore it, maybe less than that.
And there's 5 million Muslim, I understand, in France.
That's what's on paper, but there's an awful lot of them who are without papers, and officially they would say 5 million, but a lot of people I spoke to used to say we have at least 10 million here.
Wow.
That's not including, so they have the largest Muslim population who are very maligned. I used to live in a Muslim ghetto.
Sure.
And it was the first time I'd heard gunshots. It was the first time I saw riot police in the way that they were. They used to come regularly. It was the first time that I was actually scared. I felt like I was almost in a war zone. And we all remember Paris burning. There was the fires, I think, around 2006, 2007. Because what they do is they ghettoize. They don't give opportunity to not just the Muslim community, but any ethnic minority in France is marginalized, is made to feel that they are not part of this society, and they are under suspicion. France has a history of being inherently racist. And you asked me earlier, what was my experience of living in France? I was 8 months pregnant, and I remember being pushed, spat at, called names. And this was when I was 8 months pregnant, and it was just, it was just unbelievable for me, because I came from Britain, which there wasn't this atmosphere of Islamophobia. They were well ahead, and it has got worse. And when I speak to Muslims, and I lived in a ghetto because I chose to live in a ghetto. We could afford to live in the more affluent areas, alhamdulillah, but I chose to, because living amongst ordinary citizens, they were just so racist, a lot of them. So I couldn't live in French neighborhoods because
I just can't believe what you're saying, subhanAllah, sister. It's just across the channel, and this is what's happening. I mean, I believe you. You know what I mean? I mean to say that you're just unbelievable sometimes, that when you hear in Europe, in the doorsteps of the freedom-loving, pluralist societies, that this is, it's shocking, really shocking what you're saying, subhanAllah.
Well, there is no freedom. This idea of having freedom of speech and they could continue to expose themselves constantly. What you and I can say as Muslims is completely different to what a non-Muslim can say. And it's funny, because the Muslim community often say, if a non-Muslim could say what we're saying, it would hold more water, it would have more credibility. It's sad, which shows the state, the way in which Muslims are made to feel in any European state at the moment, not just France, although France, I think, are very open about their Islamophobia, because they've reached a level where they actually, their population is made up of people who are from Morocco and Algeria. And I was reading an article about why don't these Muslims stand up? And I've always said it because back home they live under dictatorships, which are propped up by the West, incidentally, dictatorships, and they will take you away just for growing a beard. In Morocco, I know people who pray with their eyes because they can't be seen to pray openly in the army if you work in the army. Otherwise, they will take you away and you'll never be seen again. So these people come from dictatorships and they come into a state in France and they just carry this mentality that you shouldn't speak out, you shouldn't say anything, you shouldn't rock the boat, because that's what they've been brought up with.
Absolutely.
And that's very clear, because you can see that they're the two North African countries that haven't had a revolution. No. They live in fear. I was hoping that they would start to speak out more, that they would, but they don't. So they are extremely powerless. I mean, much more than the Muslims in Britain, and we feel sometimes really, we don't have anyone to speak up for us, and those that speak up for us are treated like they are radicalizers or extremists or would-be terrorists, so we feel powerless sometimes. So imagine they feel so much more so than we do.
Absolutely, because very briefly, just to say that even because obviously they've been colonized as well, isn't it, to such a level that they've gone through so much. Yeah. they become desensitized completely.
Absolutely.
And what can they do? I mean, as you say,
I think
they'd
this
be
is a
different.
very good example. Of course, when we had the colonization by Britain and France, after we had the breakup of the Ottoman Caliphate, and we know about the Sykes-Picot Agreement. So Mark Sykes was British and Picot was French. They split up the countries between them, our lands. And the countries that France got were treated very, very differently to the way the British treated the countries that they colonized. They went in and it was at gunpoint. It was, we will infiltrate every aspect of your culture, so much so that I find that, well, we all know this, Moroccans and Algerians speak better French than they do Arabic. So everything here was, I mean, I went to the Moroccan airport recently and I really couldn't tell you the difference between France and Morocco. It was unbelievable. It's so much so that when I asked for wudu facilities, they looked at me as if I was some kind of really weird person. I got respect, but they said, well, we don't often get asked that. So you can imagine that they've been colonized to this level. There is a return of Islamic identity that they're behind. And we have to remember also that there are huge numbers of French reverts. When I was there, I was given a figure of 20% of the population were reverting to Islam. I lived in a very small area called Greny. It was one of the areas that suffered the Paris fires. And there was a very small mosque. And every day we would have a young lady or an older lady every day convert to Islam. This was just in our tiny mosque in the women's area. The men got 2 or 3 men a day. And a lot of these women who have become Muslim have had to travel here because they've been discriminated against. As French Muslims converting to Islam, they suffered discrimination and had to leave their own country and come here because they weren't allowed to wear the hijab as teachers, as doctors. And so, there is a lot of problems in France, and sometimes it gets forgotten because we're worried about our own problems here, and that's.
Jazakallah khair. I'm going to move on, inshallah. Obviously, you as a sister who wear the hijab. I mean, how has your experience been in here in terms of how unlikely are our sisters to get be successful in job interviews and in terms of harassment at workplace? I mean,
I get a lot of calls as a barrister. Of sisters who suffer discrimination. I have to tell you that these calls have multiplied over the years and to shocking levels. Just my office alone, I don't know, it must be worse for bigger offices and bigger law firms. There is an awful lot of discrimination. Recently I had a young girl who was recruited and then told by her manager that she couldn't wear her abaya, her jilbab. She had to remove it. And she was told, well, it's cultural, as if they've become experts in our own deen, our own religion. I think that the more subtle problems that we have, and this is something that generally people don't pick up on, is the fear that we have when we leave the house. And as tough as we are and as strong as we are, I can tell you that every time I walk out of the house, I psych myself up for a fight. I'm waiting for someone to take off my hijab. I'm waiting for someone to make a comment. It doesn't happen every day. It doesn't actually happen every other day, or it doesn't even happen every month. But it's the idea that I am vulnerable and open to an attack or a racist remark that worries me. And I was talking to a sister recently who's a teacher, and we're both mature women, and she was actually saying to me that she doesn't get on the train anymore. When she does, she starts to look around to see who could be the possible racist that is thinking of attacking her. And that's exactly what I do. And I think it's exactly what our 19, 17, 16, 15, even my young daughter who's about to start secondary, that's, I think, what she would have to do. That we're constantly looking out for the next attack. And this is a fear that we live with, and no one will understand it. No one. will understand it unless they've lived it. And this is very real. Even when I describe it to my husband, he's actually amazed. And we carry this around, and it's not clear to anybody. But when you're viewed at through the lens of a terrorist, you expect almost for people to attack you in some way. And unfortunately, it's happened to a number of our sisters. It certainly has happened in France. One sister was attacked when I was there so badly, the doctors had to surgically remove her hijab because the blood from the beating she got on her head had made her hijab stick to her head. And this happens all the time. But of course, you don't read about it in the papers, and nobody cares because our lives mean nothing, really.
Subhanallah. Sister, as you know, a lot of us sisters are listening, Muslim sisters who, mashallah, who are very, very brave in wearing the hijab. What advice as a sister would you give them in terms of what inspiration and motivation can you give them, and what advice would you give them, sister, in these difficult times?
You know, the youth are inspiring to me, and when I see a young girl who's 17, 18, 19, that doesn't have the luxury of being able to get into her vehicle because she can't afford one, you're inspiring to us as your older sisters, aunties, mothers, whatever you wish to refer to us as. So, you know, I always say to sisters, make your du'as, do the practical things, which is phone people, let them know where you are, and make sure that you phone when you get to the other side to just let people know that you're okay. But Islamically, your reward is going to be so much higher than someone who lives in the Muslim world. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not forget a moment of the struggle and even the fear, because you know when people say these sisters have courage, courage can only come about as a word when you feel fear. So it's okay to feel fear, sisters, but remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with you. And it seems to me that, you know, whoever looks remotely brown, you know, who looks either hijab, no hijab, they will be attacked. So don't ever listen to this nonsense about, oh, take off your hijab, this is haram and this is wrong. Just keep doing what you're doing and be proud to be a Muslimah. And I'm sorry for our sisters that suffered, the sister that suffered that humiliation on the beach. I am deeply, deeply sorry and deeply. But you know the French government, if you continue to do this, you continue to expose your so-called secularism. You continue to expose your so-called freedom for what it is. It's a farce. And your so-called democracy, which doesn't exist. And this idea that, and you continue to expose the fact that you will pick on the weak to make an example out of them. And this indoctrination of you're radicalizing your population by telling them that these Muslim women can cause a terrorist attack. You can continue to expose yourself, but it does not mean anything, because at the end of the day, we will continue to hold on to our deen, and we will continue to expose your so-called secular way of life, and we will continue to strengthen this deen and be firm. And that is my advice, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show, sister. Jazakallah for taking your time out. Allah bless you, inshallah. And I hope and pray that you will be able to join us in the future shows as well.
Allahumma ameen. Jazakallah khair.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
Let me introduce you to our contributors in the show today, inshallah. So I also have another special guest, Brother Abu Talha. Assalamu alaikum, Abu Talha.
Wa alaikum salam.
I also have our regular contributor, mashallah, Abu Omar. Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Right. So as you've heard from our sister, the lot has been discussed. If I could start with Brother Abu Talha, in terms of why has France taken such a drastic steps to criminalize the Burkini in beaches?
Well, I mean, I think there are a number of angles, a number of reasons, I guess. I think firstly, from one perspective, from the French politicians, they've basically failed. There's political failure locally and internationally. So we see that, around the world, that in order to kind of justify or turn people's attention away from political failures in terms of the situation of their own people and the wars all around the world, they got to blame somebody. And certainly they blame Muslims, and they're a useful scapegoat. But I think it's deeper than that, in the sense that they just don't know how to deal with Islam, and their secularism, their version of secularism, or secularism per se, finds it very, very difficult to deal with Islam, because their whole way of life was built upon a rejection of medieval Christianity. It was a certain historical thing. And that's not what Islam is. And so now they are basically, I almost think it's segregation, essentially, which is ironic. They accuse Muslims of segregation, but they are segregating Muslims because they want to keep them away from sight. And so they're slowly forcing this segregation upon us. Maybe there will be, if they follow the same logic, you'll have parks where non-Muslims cannot go. Or maybe water fountains, it sounds funny, sounds strange.
Ridiculous.
Where Muslims cannot go because they don't want to see Islam. They don't want to see it in front of them. And their colonial history has that as well. Literally millions.
Isn't it? But, Europe doesn't have a good record. They can't be proud of the history that they have, isn't it? I mean, in terms of all the colonization and the inquisitions.
That's right. I mean, if we think about the origins of kind of these fascist and racist attitudes and nationalistic, tribalistic attitudes at the level of a state, it happened here. It happened in Europe. And, all the imperial countries are guilty of that historically. And this idea of kind of punishing the victims, blaming the victims, saving the natives. And the French did that in Algeria, killing millions and millions of people. And they forced them to unveil as well. And unveiling was a sign of accepting civilization and being civilized and being emancipated by the colonizer. So in that sense, they still haven't been able to deal with, it's kind of repeating itself.
Brother Abu Omar?
Yes, what I would like to actually say about the drastic steps that the French government has taken over the Burkini is that I think I don't have to actually give my own interpretation on this. What I would like to actually say that the mayor of Cannes, his name is David Lisnard. He actually hid his true intentions behind the ban. He was saying to protect the public order in the time of Cannes terrorist attacks. But this is just to actually, guise it under this public order statement. And that was his fatwa regarding the ban. But if we look at his other statements, he actually says that Burkinis were a symbol of Islamic extremism. So he's basically saying that it symbolizes Islam, and we don't want anything to do with Islam in our soil. I think the Prime Minister also says that, anything that which says that the women's body is unholy has no ground or no place in France. But Muslim never said that, women's body is unholy. I think it was the Christianity who actually blamed Eve that, she was a sin from Adam. So it wasn't, it wasn't actually, Islam. And what he was saying is that the Burkini does not actually respect the good morals and the secularism and the liberalism of the state. So we find that, this is the struggle or the quarrel over this piece of cloth is not only to do with the piece of cloth, it's actually to do with the ideological struggle. It's a struggle against, liberalism and Islam, and which, clearly David Lisnard has stated, it does not respect the secular values of France. This is why it has to be stopped. But in his earlier statement, he says to protect public order. But if I may say, protect public order, he's trying to say that there will be a public backlash against the Muslims, or there will be quarrel. Just like we find, for example, in the back street of Whitechapel over here, between the, the front, the
National Front,
BNP, and the
or
Muslims.
the Britain First.
He's trying to say that we're trying to protect that. But the thing is, who are the people who actually ignite this furor within France or within Britain? It's actually these politicians.
It's the establishment, isn't it?
It's the establishment who are very selfish in actually preserving. Who are very selfish in preserving their capitalistic values. And the Sister Ibtihal was saying that these countries and these establishments are very, very forceful in taking the women's clothing off from the women. And Muslim women, on the other hand, trying to actually, put their clothing on to preserve their modesty and chastity. And it begs the question that, a lot of these, women rights and women liberalism or liberalism in France has come about. Some of it has come about from the suffragettes, from feminism. But if we look at the word, bikini, the word bikini is actually coined by a German mechanical engineer called Louis Reard. And in 1946, he actually designed this, bikini. Bikini means two-piece clothing. And he actually coined this word because Bikini is actually a name of an island in South Pacific.
I didn't know that.
South Pacific. It's actually a coral reef. And there's many islands. And this is the site where, USA actually, tests its, nuclear missiles and nuclear, atomic bombs and things like that. So just before its tests, he actually, launched his, bikini designs onto...
But what would you say to this lady, Rosengel? She says designers are there to make women more beautiful, to give their freedom, not to collaborate with this dictatorship which hides women. So isn't bikini more liberating, more giving freedom?
Of course, this is actually depends on how
that's
people...
what happened in the Olympics as well, if you notice.
This is, it depends on how viewers actually, view this. But it seems that, ever since the launch of, Burkini, 70,000 pieces have been sold. Marks and Spencer have sold out on them. And the designer, whose name is Ayad, her name is...
Some Australian lady.
Who actually from Lebanon, Zanetti, she says that, ever since the controversial thing has happened, she's getting more inquiries and more sales from it. And most of the people who are buying this are Western women. So it seems that Western women find this is more liberating.
Nigella Lawson, for example.
Has worn it. A lot of the beach guards, lifeguards have been, wearing it. So it's actually a, what do they call? It's actually a very hot sale of this product, and it is actually more liberating. And I think the right thing to say over here is that the French authorities and some of the Western authorities feel that they are frightened that Islamic values will take over the world, and just like we've seen that how non-Muslims are actually rushing to actually wear this attire.
Jazakallah khair. Brother Abu Talha.
Just one thing on that. In a way, the Burkini is really interesting because it's actually an attempt to fit in. It's an attempt to kind of bend or actually break the laws of Islam to do with covering, to compromise in order to fit into the society.
But yet we have this.
It's really and yet that's not acceptable.
That's not acceptable.
And so on the one hand, they say you need to integrate, you need to be like us. But on the other hand, people are demonized and dehumanized for doing that. But wait a minute, they're citizens. They are people who work, they pay taxes, they're part of the society, so they have a right to protection. So this issue about public order, who's going to protect them? They are no less human and no less worthy of protection, and they have a right to define the identity of the community and the nation. So it's really, really hypocritical.
But do you think that they're afraid? Because surely it's only a three-piece clothing that only it's a form of modest clothing. Why are they so afraid of? Is it about the clothing that they're afraid of, or is it something more sinister?
I think it's a lot more than that, isn't it? The point is, what does the clothing represent? Mm-hmm. And to them, though they claim it represents terrorism, we know that there is no link between Islamic behavior and following Islam and being a practicing religious person and violence.
There's no evidence for that.
We know it's the opposite of that, and that kind of narrative is being spread, all over the world now. I mean, the chap who, that Ahmed Sulibali, remember in January 2015, he attacked France, and he was seen taking pictures of himself and his girlfriend wearing a bikini on the beach and this kind of thing.
Hardly Islamist, was he? I mean,
yeah, exactly. So this link is not there. So really, it's something deeper. It's something to do with Islam and how Islam challenges their view, because they have this thing called secularism, which is some kind of way of life, some kind of universal, paradigm, should we say. And Islam challenges that, and they have frankly failed to convince anyone, and after failing to convince anyone, they're now using force, and as we know, when you do that, it just makes things worse. And as the sister said, they're exposing themselves, their hypocrisy, their intellectual weakness, their cowardice. These are all signs of a bully. Absolutely. And we have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and anyone with integrity and principles is not afraid of bullies.
Jazakallah khair. I've got a lot of texts coming through, but unfortunately I won't be able to read all of them, but just to select one or two, maybe brothers you can answer them. One of them says, my relatives went to France for holiday and they faced racial abuse. Should Muslims boycott France? Abu Omar?
I think there's a lot of calls for like boycotting France or boycotting Israeli dates or boycotting, Coca-Cola. I think these are not the right way to go about in actually
solving
the problem or to combating, ideology with an ideology. We can see clearly over here that this is a battle about ideology. It's about the belief of Islam and the Islamic way of life, and also the belief of liberalism and secularism. So it's not only about France. We can see that liberalism and secularism is actually dominating the world over now, all the nations around the world. If you look at even Bangladesh, it has becoming an ultra-secularist country with the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. We find, I've recently been to Bangladesh, and I saw how the CTS and the Prevent and the contest has been implemented rigorously
in Bangladesh.
In Bangladesh, word by word, all the things that you will find in those documents.
More robustly than probably here.
Everything, I've heard actually before going to, Bangladesh over here, that, Prime Minister was saying over here in Britain that it's a moral duty of every parent and every citizen to spy on their children. We find the same rhetoric actually, elaborated or explained or rolled over in Bangladesh as well. I was in Bangladesh when we found that, every city, every village, every district, the government had, it has been orchestrating. I actually saw a roadshow where, the school children will be actually called into the roadshow to actually, detest and campaign against something called Jongi, against the Jongi. Jongi means against, jihadism and terrorism. But we all know these are only guises to actually suppress Islam. And we find the same policies being implemented over there as well. So those Muslims, I think it's a true reactionary sentiment of Muslims to boycott France or boycott Britain. All places around the world is Allah's land, and we should be all going there, not boycotting them. We should be all going there and interacting with those societies. If you look at, the sister was saying that millions of sisters in France are turning and reverting back to Islam, and the state figures of 5 million is not necessarily true. So we shouldn't be boycotting any country. Should we be boycotting Bangladesh? Should we be boycotting Turkey? Surely this is not the way. I think what Muslims need to do, they need to understand how to actually tackle another ideology. This is about a battle of ideas, and we need to actually tackle ideas within ideas. We need to show the fallacy of secularism. Show, like the brother and like the sister has said, that they have taken the extreme style of now forcing and bullying Islam and Islamic ideas, just because they can't win them, rationally.
Jazakallah khair. Abu Talha, in all fairness, just to maybe represent the champions of liberal values, I mean, you know what has happened in the last 2 years, last 1.5 years. There's been many attacks in Europe and in France, in Nice and a few other places, in Germany. Surely the politicians and the establishment have a duty, a moral and a legal duty to protect their people. And hence, this is the pretext they use to say, look, whatever we can't take anything for granted. And therefore, we're banning this burkini in beaches. How would you respond to that?
Well, I mean, absolutely. Everyone needs to protect themselves. We need to protect ourselves individually, and states need to protect themselves and collectively. Absolutely, that's true. But you need to be honest about that. So we know that this story, this narrative that they're telling us, which is that Islam is the cause of violence around the world.
It's not true, because most of these attackers were not even practicing Muslims, isn't it? They're mentally disturbed.
And furthermore, when a number of pieces of academic research have been done into this area, including in the UK, and when they interviewed terrorists, they found only one common denominator, actually, which is grievance against foreign policy. So they found that the fundamental driving factor for people who wrongly, involve themselves in violent action against civilians is this kind of sense of anger and frustration and hopelessness that they feel as a result of, their people being attacked. And that's nowhere on the radar. I mean, nobody talks about that.
Jazakallah khair. How can the champions of liberal values accommodate Muslims? I mean, Brother Abu Omar, what can they do? I mean, what advice can you give them? I mean, do you have any suggestions for them as to how they can accommodate Muslims and Islam? Can they accommodate them?
I mean, the thing is, obviously we know this is really a clash of civilization. We know that this is really about Islam and secularism. And but however, we see that there is dwindling population in Europe and America, and Europe definitely needs migrants to actually come over and help oil its ship and engine to actually uplift the labor market, raise the economy. But a lot of the population, young, vibrant, and high population are in Muslim countries, so they have a dilemma on their hand. So I think one of the ways the Western nations or liberal nations actually accommodate, Muslim migrants in their country is by actually watering down the notion of what Islam stands for. So, for example, like, if you look at, why some of the Muslims are now calling that, it's our freedom to choose Burkini. So this has been championed. This sort of ideas has been championed. Okay, if you want to actually protest for Burkini or for halal meat or for this and that, protest it from the basis of freedom. So erroneously, from the Islamic perspective, that this is not correct. So they're saying that it is our freedom to actually choose how we should dress in beaches. Obviously, this is wrong. We know the reasons why some of the Muslims actually taken on to wear burkinis is because the mandate of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where He subhanahu wa ta'ala has dictated women should actually cover her head to toe. revealing only hands and face. This is the real reason behind this. But these sort of ideals, through also engineering the curriculum, engineering the madrasas, and engineering the mosques, the governments or liberal secularist governments, the way they accommodate Muslims and Islam is to dilute down, is to actually confuse the minds of the Muslims in understanding what Islam really stands for. So this is one of the things.
So are you saying then that liberal values and Islam cannot coexist?
Liberal values and Islam...
Secular democracy says secular.
Well, the thing is, liberal values, the word liberal, if it means freedom, Muslim actually believe in the expression to actually account rulers, the expression to actually discuss and debate and find reason in things, vis-a-vis with Islam. But liberal over here is actually few people, the echelons of society, is their interpretation of what freedom means, what liberal means. Yeah. So as I said, the man who actually was, who designed bikinis was not a woman, was a man. Who designed the two-piece, which is a piece of a bra and a thong, really, to undress women, if you like. And so this is their version of liberalism. It's not necessarily liberating women or emancipating women. Islam, on the other hand, actually liberates mankind from this sort of enslavement of some men over women or all the other nations.
Jazakallah.
But I just want to actually
continue. Time. Very
briefly,
briefly, please.
Continue with how they want to actually accommodate. If you look at the Sharia Council of Britain, you see they limit Islam just to marriages, limit Islam just to halal food, and limit Islam to compromises and that sort of thing. And this is the politics. And another way to actually accommodate Muslims is to actually restrict the amount of people who actually come to Britain. They actually also profile and screen what kind of individuals they would actually let in. So for example, Zakir Naik was actually stopped from actually coming to Britain. And this we see, and just in Bangladesh, he's been stopped. His TV station's been stopped. So we find these are the low-level tactics, shallow and irrational, sometimes of bullying in nature, is being used to accommodate Muslims and Islam in the Western society. But this is not going to take long. They will fail, and they are failing.
Jazakallah khair. Abu Talha, can you explain to our listeners how Islam views women, and do they have any rights?
I mean, the view regarding women in Islam. But could I just quickly mention a quick point about the previous one? I mean, the secularists, they have a real dilemma, actually. Yeah. And the dilemma is that they're trying to view Islam from their own viewpoint. That's the issue, fundamentally. So they see either Islam as some kind of secular religion or something give to God what is God, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. And so therefore, like Christianity. So there's nothing to do with life in Islam. Or they're seeing that, we have to make them go through what the Christians went through, a reformation, so they can... So that's just fundamentally flawed. If they're to understand the Muslim experience, accept it or reject it, believe it or not, they have to, take it on its own terms in order to understand it, and they don't. They don't do that. They have to understand that Islam is its own kind of paradigm, and if they understand that, they said, really, there's nothing to fear. There's nothing to fear, and stop frightening the people, and let the Muslims, don't be afraid of us. I mean, it's just crazy. But regarding what you said about...
the Islam's viewpoint,
regarding
where
women.
does it all come from?
Yeah,
because our sisters are making a lot of sacrifices.
Yeah, absolutely. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, fundamentally, we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we do actions to please Him. He is our master. We are His slaves. And we do things to become closer to Him and to gain His mercy and His forgiveness and His reward. That's what life is about for Muslims. So Muslims don't do actions, if
but
a
does
Muslim...
Does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say then, just put your woman behind closed doors?
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Sorry. So there's two issues. One, we do it to worship Allah.
Can they interact? Can they come out and do transactions? And what can they do?
So this is within the way Islam views the man-woman relationship. So the man-woman relationship in Islam, we have a particular perspective on it, which is that it's a unique relationship from which emanates a relationship and children and uncles and aunties, brothers and sisters, a whole family structure. And so therefore Islam has put in place a system in which men and women cooperate. They help each other get to paradise, essentially, and we work together to achieve that, but we don't harm the morals and the morality, and we don't harm what comes from the man-woman relationship in terms of family and children and so on and so forth. So we protect marriage, and we have rules of clothing and so on and so forth. We honor the women very highly, and we shouldn't fall into the trap, as Muslims have fallen into the trap, some of us, in adopting the Western way of thinking regarding men and women, and then we have problems in our marriages and so on and so forth. But Islam has a view in that regard.
I just wanted to add in this 1400 years ago, it was actually Islam who actually gave the rights to women. When women was actually used like, commodities or Muslim women were actually used as a, piece of sex objects and things like that. When women had no rights whatsoever, Islam came and said that men and women,
they were buried alive. Young children, girls were buried alive.
When young girls were actually buried alive, because people thought that they will not be able to actually fund them or to actually feed them, because they will not be breadwinners, or they might bring liabilities to the family. At that time, Islam, it's not Christianity, it's not a Democritus or the Greek philosophy of whatever, which came and said that the women should be given the equal rights, or they should be given the honor just like men are given the honor. So Islam came and says that women has the right of inheritance. They should be treated equally. They are equal partners. When it comes to piety, they will be judged equally. When the world at the time thought there's something wrong with women, so this is the view of Islam. Is of very high integrity, high honor that it places. And unfortunately, the way the media is actually creating hysteria against the women, Muslim women today, they're saying that as if the Prime Minister of France was saying that, these Muslims think that Muslim women's body is unholy or unpure, that's why they have to cover it. This is a nonsense. This is a facade. This is a conspiratorial,
to protect the woman and the modesty.
There's nothing like that. And Muslims need to actually understand that this is the value, this is the battle of ideas, and they need to really understand that it's not something to do with clothing. It's a battle of ideas, and they need to see through this, and they need to engage in
very briefly in 1 minute, as a father, as a husband, what kind of advice would you give to other sisters who are listening? Obviously we've had Ibtihal giving, just very briefly as a man.
I think alhamdulillah, the world, we see that Islam is the fastest growing religion on earth, and alhamdulillah, praise be to Allah for that. And our elders have actually built mosques, and because of that Muslims are going to mosque and are learning the Islamic etiquettes of dress code and etiquettes of behavior. This is all doing good.
So
and
should
I
they
think
continue wear the hijab, or should the sisters compromise because of the current
the fathers need to encourage their daughters to early on get them to adopt the Islamic dress code of hijab and jilbab. And Prophet Muhammad said that just like prayers, when they're 7, teach them how to pray, and when they are 9, command them to pray. And this is a sign of actually saying to the Muslims, that even at the age of 7, we need to make sure that our daughters and our sisters are wearing
very
the
quickly,
hijab.
Abu Talha, question from Abdullah. He says, if this, what happened a few days ago to the sister in France, if this happened to a Catholic nun or an Orthodox Jew, or any other group of women who wear modest clothes, what would happen to them? Very briefly,
nothing. Very briefly.
In terms of if they would, if that was done to them, the point he's trying to make, I think, is that there's no leadership in terms of Muslim representing or coming forward and condemning what's happening. Why is that the case?
Well, exactly. Our leaders are silent, aren't they? The Saudi king was in Cannes just prior to this, wasn't he? And he hired out the whole beach of Cannes, a lot of it.
And the other one, sure.
Sorry.
Time doesn't permit me, but I need to just cover this other text where it says, look, if this happened in a beach in, say, in Middle East, for example, Dubai, where the woman, non-Muslim woman wearing the bikini, and say an Arab police officer came and arrested them, what would be the reaction?
I'll say to this actually, the reaction very by the liberal states like USA and France is they would be actually they would be in a position of sending naval bases, army naval bases against those countries, trying to liberate, or they would actually go in the guise of, the country has been taken by Taliban, or it has been taken by ISIS.
Extremists.
This is how much of a force that they would actually use in order to protect their values or their citizens. But, unfortunate to say that our leaders are spineless, and nobody in the world is actually, figurehead is actually saying this. And if anybody are saying this, from the ulama, they are being locked up. And it's unfortunate. And I think this is why, we cannot rely on our leaders, neither on any, figureheads in the Muslim community. Or I think generally all the Muslims need to, rise up and, educate themselves about the values of Islam and the ideals of Islam. And they need to view that Islam is a way of life. And by whatever reason, necessary, obviously with halal means they need to uphold their Islamic values and promote the Islamic values. Because it is through this promotion and through this adherence of Islam, we find how millions of women in Cannes only, in France, Britain, and in USA are turning into the folds of Islam. And this is without, actually establishing an Islamic, system. Imagine what would happen if we were to actually establish an Islamic system where a leader protects Islamic values and challenges these Islamic values against the other values of the world. What would happen? Then we would find that, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Izaja, that you will find millions of people will flock into the, fold of Islam. And that will be a true day for the Muslims to see. So Muslims should go on, abide by Islam, stand for Islam, promote Islam, whatever it takes, and Allah is their witness, and they will be rewarded in the heaven, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. I've got just a few more texts that I must read out. And obviously, brothers, if you want to come in, then please come in. By wearing the burqa, do the guests think that the Muslim women are exposing the fitna of the sexualized society of the West? And Muhammad from East London. Another one, very interesting. The liberal ideology has proven time and time again its intolerance of people of other cultures. Look at Europe over the last few centuries, how they persecuted all sorts. This is only the latest episode, and the new Inquisition is manifest. There was a demo today regarding Bikini. What was the objective? And so do demos work? Liberalism has failed to convince the Muslims, and this is the decline of the Western ideas. Do you want to come in on the demo, Abu Talha? Do the demonstration work?
Obviously people are angry, and they want to do something, and they want to stand up, and that's completely understandable. So I'm not going to judge people in that sense. But what I would say is that the thing that is at flaw, as we've been saying, is this idea of kind of liberal secular viewpoint. That's the thing that's flawed. And what happens in France is then spread to other countries. The sister was talking about the anti-terror laws in this country. I remember a month or so again, there was this big hoo-ha about a Muslim male only swimming in Luton, and the newspapers were really upset that 10% of the people in Luton are Muslim. Let them swim. Well, they pay taxes. Why don't you allow them to swim? There's a big deal out of that, So I think, we'd be foolish to think that they are going to take care of us.
So in terms of expectation, can we, the listeners will be obviously thinking, can they expect anything from the liberal champion of liberal values? Can they
you know what it is? I think it's important us to have these discussions because there is humanity in humans, and so we see that amongst the people around us, the Muslims, the non-Muslims, and they see the contradictions, they see the hypocrisy, and they're confused. A lot of them, they don't know what to do. You said there are a lot of people who are feminists and one world liberals. and they're silent because they don't know how to deal with Islam. They don't know how to deal with religion. So I think it's very useful and a very good opportunity for us to discuss about what Islam actually is and just be honest about it, and to show its history and to show how we protected Muslims and non-Muslims, males and females historically. And we'll do so again with Allah Ta'ala's permission. And the problem is these leaders, they're just so scared of a revival of Islam.
Jazakallah khair. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. So once again, thank you for listening to our show. And inshallah, you can continue with the discussion on Twitter. And also, please check out our website, www.straight-talk.com, because you can listen to all our previous shows as well, inshallah. So I would like to thank our contributors, both of the brothers who have attended to our show. Jazakallah for coming and sacrificing your time. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you both for coming into the show, inshallah. Until next time, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Middle Path Radio, your number one online Islamic talk station.